a single yellowed page fluttered from an ancient book and landed at Hercule Poirot's feet, carrying a curse that nearly ended the great detective's life. Welcome to the story. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and enjoy the tale. If you're loving the suspense already, hit subscribe. Your support means a lot to us, and drop in the comments where you're watching from. Chapter 1. The Yellowed Page. The fog clung to the cobblestone streets of London like a living shroud as Hercule Poirot stepped out from the warmth of his flat on a crisp autumn morning in 1935. His patent leather shoes clicked sharply against the stones and his perfectly waxed moustache twitched with the chill. He was on his way to meet an old friend, Professor Archibald Thorne, at the British Museum, when something unusual caught his sharp grey eyes. A street vendor, an elderly man with trembling hands, was selling rare books from a battered cart. One volume stood out, its leather cover cracked and faded, bearing no title but embossed with a strange symbol that looked like an eye inside a triangle. Poirot paused, drawn by an inexplicable pull. He approached the vendor and asked about the book. The old man glanced nervously over his shoulder and whispered, "It's not for sale, sir. It brings bad luck, it does." Poirot smiled, his famous little grey cells already whirring with curiosity. He insisted on buying it, slipping a generous coin into the man's palm. As he tucked the book under his arm, the vendor muttered, "May God protect you, monsieur." Back in his cosy apartment, Poirot placed the mysterious book on his mahogany desk under the glow of a green-shaded lamp. He adjusted his pince-nez and carefully opened the cover. The pages were brittle, smelling of dust and forgotten attics. Most were blank, but toward the middle he found a single sheet of parchment inserted between the leaves. It was handwritten in faded ink with elegant looping script. Poirot read aloud the hidden manuscript of eternal secrets. "Whoever possesses this page shall unlock knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, but at the price of their soul." He chuckled softly, dismissing it as melodramatic nonsense. Yet his fingers tingled as they traced the words. The symbol from the cover was drawn at the bottom, surrounded by cryptic Latin phrases. Poirot recognized some words: vita mors scientia, life, death, knowledge. Intrigued, he decided to translate the rest, using his pocket dictionary. Little did he know this innocent curiosity would spiral into a nightmare. That evening, Poirot invited his faithful friend Captain Hastings over for dinner. Hastings, a sturdy man with a kind face and a penchant for golf, arrived promptly at 7. Over roast beef and potatoes, Poirot showed him the book and the parchment. Hastings laughed heartily. "Sounds like one of those Gothic novels, old boy, full of ghosts and curses." Poirot nodded, but his eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami, but Hercule Poirot does not believe in curses, only in the mischief of human minds." They spent the night deciphering the Latin. It spoke of an ancient order called the Guardians of the Veil, who hid forbidden knowledge in manuscripts scattered across Europe. The page Poirot held was supposedly a map to the rest, a key to unimaginable power. Hastings yawned, growing bored, but Poirot was hooked. He worked late into the night, sketching the symbol and noting possible locations mentioned in riddles like the shadow of the Sphinx or the whisper of the Thames. The next morning brought the first sign of trouble. Poirot woke with a splitting headache, unusual for a man of his disciplined habits. He dismissed it as indigestion from the rich meal, but as he dressed, he noticed his reflection in the mirror seemed off. His moustache looked slightly crooked, though he had groomed it perfectly. Shaking his head, he headed to the museum to consult Professor Thorne, an expert in antiquities. The professor, a wiry man with thick spectacles, examined the parchment under a magnifying glass. "Fascinating," he murmured. "This symbol matches relics from a 14th century cult in Flanders, believed to practice alchemy and darker arts. But Poirot, this page is incomplete. Without the others, it is worthless and dangerous. Rumors say collectors have died pursuing the full manuscript, poisoned or driven mad." Poirot thanked him and left, pondering the warning. By afternoon, strange events escalated. Poirot received an anonymous letter delivered by a boy who vanished before questions could be asked. The note, written in the same looping script, warned leave the manuscript or suffer the fate of the curious. Enclosed was a small vial of colourless liquid. Poirot sniffed it cautiously, detecting a faint almond-scent cyanide. His heart raced, but his mind stayed calm. Someone knew he had the page and wanted it back desperately. He called Inspector Japp at Scotland Yard, who arrived grumbling about Poirot's knack for trouble. Japp, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, dusted the letter for prints but found none. It's a threat, all right, but vague. Be careful, Poirot, these cult fanatics don't play games. Poirot agreed to hand over the parchment for safekeeping, but secretly made a copy first. He was determined to unravel the mystery. As night fell, Poirot sat alone in his study, the book open before him. He felt watched, though the curtains were drawn. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Gripping his cane, he crept to the door and flung it open. Nothing but shadows. Returning to his desk, he noticed the parchment had shifted slightly. Or had it? Paranoia crept in like the fog outside. He decided to test the curse theory rationally. Placing the page in a sealed envelope, he locked it in his safe and went to bed. Sleep came fitfully haunted by dreams of endless libraries where books, whispered secrets, and eyes followed from the shelves. The following day, Poirot visited the vendor again, but the cart was gone, replaced by a flower stall. The flower seller, a cheerful woman, claimed no knowledge of any bookman. Frustrated, Poirot walked along the Thames, pondering clues. The riddles mentioned the whisper of the Thames, perhaps a location nearby. He recalled an old warehouse by the river once used by smugglers. Deciding to investigate, he hailed a taxi. En route, he noticed a black car following at a distance. The driver wore a hat pulled low. Poirot's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. At the warehouse, a dilapidated building with boarded windows, Poirot paid the driver and slipped inside through a side door. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through cracks. Crates lined the walls labelled with faded shipping marks. In the centre stood a table, and on it another page identical in style to his own. Heart pounding, he approached. As he reached for it, a voice echoed from the darkness. "You should have heeded the warning, monsieur." A figure emerged, tall and cloaked, holding a revolver. The man's face was obscured by a mask bearing the iron triangle symbol. Poirot raised his hand slowly. "Who are you, and why do you seek this manuscript?" The man laughed softly. "It is not for outsiders. The knowledge corrupts. Return what you have and live." Poirot stalled, buying time. "Knowledge is never corrupting, only the weak mind. Tell me of the Guardians." The man hesitated, then lunged. Poirot dodged, using his cane to trip him. They grappled the gun, firing wildly into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Poirot pinned the man briefly, but a second assailant appeared from behind, striking Poirot on the head. Darkness swallowed him as he fell, the parchment slipping from the table into shadows. When Poirot awoke, he was bound in a chair back in his apartment. The cloaked man stood over him, injecting something into his arm from a syringe, a slow poison to mimic heart failure. No one will suspect. Poirot felt numbness spreading, but his mind raced. He had hidden a small knife in his sleeve earlier, a habit from past cases. As the man turned to leave, Poirot cut the ropes silently. Springing up, he grabbed a heavy vase and smashed it over the assailant's head. The man crumpled. Poirot called Japp, who arrived with officers. They unmasked the attacker, revealing a young scholar Poirot recognized from the museum, an assistant to Professor Thorne. Under questioning, the scholar confessed. The Guardians were real, a secret society protecting the manuscript fragments. The full text contained formulas for eternal life, but drove readers insane with visions. Thorne was the leader, using assistants as enforcers. The page Poirot found was bait to lure greedy collectors. "But why target me?" asked Poirot. "You are famous, your involvement would expose us," replied the scholar. Japp arrested him and raided the museum, finding Thorne with more pages. Thorne swallowed poison rather than talk, dying with a smile. Poirot recovered fully, the poison neutralized in time by a doctor. He burned his copy of the parchment, vowing never to chase cursed knowledge again. Yet in quiet moments he wondered if fragments remained hidden, waiting for the next curious soul. The book from the vendor vanished from evidence, never to be seen. Was it truly cursed, or just the folly of men guarding secrets too heavy? Poirot leaned back in his chair, sipping cocoa. The little grey cells had triumphed, but at what cost to his peace? This chilling encounter marked the beginning of Poirot's brush with the supernatural, or so it seemed. But deeper mysteries lurked in the manuscript's origins, pulling him toward dangers unseen. Stay tuned for what happens next in Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Whispers in the catacombs. Weeks after the warehouse scuffle, Poirot received a plain envelope slid under his door at dawn. Inside lay a brass key, etched with the same iron triangle, and a slip of paper reading Paris Saint-Germain-des-Prés, midnight 3 days hence. No signature. Poirot turned the key in his palm, feeling its weight. Japp had closed the London case, declaring the society dismantled. Yet this invitation proved otherwise. Hastings urged caution over breakfast, but Poirot booked the night train to Calais, his curiosity reignited. The journey across the Channel was smooth, the ferry cutting through black water under a moonless sky. Poirot stood on deck, coat collar upwind, whipping his scarf. He sensed eyes upon him, though the deck was empty save for a lone steward. Arriving in Paris, he checked into a modest hotel near the Seine and spent the day strolling the left bank, blending with artists and students. At a smoky café, he overheard two men speaking in hushed tones about Les Gardiens du Voile and a gathering beneath the church. Poirot leaned closer, nursing an espresso. They mentioned a descent into old quarries where bones of saints and sinners mingled. His pulse quickened the catacombs. Midnight found Poirot at the iron gate of Saint-Germain-des-Prés Abbey. The key fit perfectly, the lock clicking like a heartbeat. He descended spiral stone stairs, torchlight from his pocket, casting long shadows on damp walls. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of earth and decay. Footsteps echoed ahead, guiding him deeper. Voices rose in chant Latin mixed with older tongues. Poirot extinguished his light and crept forward. A cavern opened, vast and pillared by human femurs stacked in patterns. Hooded figures formed a circle around a stone altar where a leather-bound tome lay open. Candle flames flickered, revealing pages dense with illustrations of alchemical symbols and grotesque hybrids. A woman in crimson robes led the rite, her voice melodic yet commanding. She held a fragment matching Poirot's lost page. "This is the heart of the veil," she intoned. "With it we bind life to will eternal." Poirot edged along the wall, counting 12 participants. Masks hid faces, but postures betrayed youth and fervour. The woman placed the fragment into the tome, and the chant swelled. Suddenly a man at the edge collapsed, clutching his chest. Foam bubbled from his lips, eyes rolling white. The circle faltered. "Poison," the woman hissed. "Find the intruder," panic rippled. Poirot backed away, but his heel struck a loose bone, clattering loudly. Torches swung toward him. He bolted down a side tunnel, heart hammering. Pursuers followed their footsteps, a thunder behind. The catacombs twisted like a labyrinth, passages narrowing then widening. Poirot ducked into an alcove, pressing against cold skulls. Breath held, he listened as boots passed, then faded. Minutes later he emerged, cautiously retracing steps by memory. The altar chamber was empty. The tome gone, only the dead man remained sprawled in ritual robes. Poirot knelt, examining the body. Lips blue, a faint almond trace, cyanide again. A small puncture on the neck suggested injection. He searched pockets, finding a train ticket to Brussels dated tomorrow and a folded note. "Deliver the heart or join the bones." Rising, Poirot heard dripping water and followed the sound to a grate leading upward. He climbed rungs slick with moss, emerging in a moonlit cemetery behind the church. Graves stood silent witnesses. Brushing dirt from his coat, he hailed a taxi back to the hotel, mind racing. The society lived splintered perhaps, but active. The woman in crimson was key, her authority absolute. Dawn painted the Seine gold as Poirot sat at his window piecing clues. The heart fragment unlocked something in the tome, likely the next step toward the full manuscript. Brussels loomed the dead man's destination. Poirot packed a small valise and caught the midday express north. Carriages rattled through French countryside fields, giving way to Belgian flats. He dozed fitfully, dreaming of endless bones forming words he could not read. Brussels greeted him with drizzle and the scent of waffles. He checked into a pension near the Grand Place under an assumed name. Evening brought him to a Gothic townhouse on Rue de la Violette, its windows dark. The brass key from Paris fit this door too. Inside dust covers shrouded furniture, a grandfather clock ticked solemnly. Upstairs he found a study walls lined with occult volumes. On the desk lay the crimson-robed woman's photograph labelled Elise Moreau, descendant of the original Guardians. A floorboard creaked behind. Poirot spun to face a gaunt man in butler's livery holding a silver tray. "Tea, monsieur." Before Poirot answered, the man swung the tray edge sharp. Poirot ducked the blow, crashing into a shelf, books tumbling. They grappled the butler stronger than he looked. Poirot kneed him and broke free, racing downstairs. The front door slammed shut, locked from outside. Windows barred. Trapped. Smoke curled from the study fireplace, too thick, too fast. The butler had ignited papers. Flames licked shelves, devouring rare tomes. Poirot grabbed a chair, smashing a window. Glass shattered, he climbed out as fire roared behind. On the street, neighbours gathered shouting. Sirens wailed. Poirot melted into the crowd before police arrived, coughing but alive. Later in a cafe, he examined salvaged scraps, one singed page bearing a map fragment pointing to Prague. Elise Moreau had fled there with the heart. The society played a deadly game, scattering pieces to protect or perhaps complete the manuscript. Poirot wired Hastings for funds and boarded the night train east, vowing to end the chase. Little did he know, Prague held horrors beyond fire and bone, where the veil between worlds thinned to breaking. The trail grows colder and deadlier, pulling Poirot toward an ancient city steeped in magic and madness. Chapter 3 awaits beneath Bohemian spires. Chapter 3. The clockmaker's shadow Prague unfolded beneath a bruised October sky, its spires stabbing low clouds like needles through velvet. Poirot stepped off the train at Wilson Station, clutching a worn valise and the singed map scrap. Trams clanged along cobblestones, while the Vltava River slid past bridges heavy with statues of saints and gargoyles. He found lodging in a narrow pension above a marionette shop, wooden puppets dangling in the window, their painted eyes tracking every passerby. Night settled fast. Poirot followed the map to the old town square where the astronomical clock chimed 9. Figures of apostles paraded in the tower windows while below a crowd gasped at death tolling his bell. The scrap indicated a meeting at the 10th stroke in the clockmaker's workshop beneath the tower. Poirot waited across the square in a shadowed archway, coat collar high. At the final chime, a panel in the clock base slid open and a stooped figure in a leather apron emerged, beckoning. Inside the workshop, gears glittered like constellations. Brass pendulums swung in hypnotic rhythm. The clockmaker, an old man with ink-stained fingers and eyes milky from cataracts, greeted Poirot in halting French. "You seek the heart," he rasped. "Elise left it with me for safekeeping, but the price is blood." He led Poirot down a spiral stair, hidden behind a false gear, into a cellar, lit by a single lantern. Shelves groaned under clock parts and yellowed diagrams. In the centre stood a glass case containing the crimson fragment, sealed in wax. Before Poirot could speak, the old man pressed a hidden lever. Iron bars slammed across the stair. Poison gas hissed from vents, sweet and cloying. The clockmaker donned a mask, his voice muffled. "The Guardians test loyalty. Only the worthy breathe." Poirot covered his mouth with a handkerchief, eyes scanning. A ventilation grate high in the wall offered escape. He dragged a workbench beneath it, pried the grate loose and hauled himself into a narrow shaft. Gas followed, curling like smoke, but the climb was short. He emerged in the clock tower itself, amid massive wheels turning with relentless patience. From the tower balcony, Prague spread in a maze of red roofs and golden lights. Footsteps ascended the stairs. Poirot hid behind the great bell as two hooded figures entered, one carrying the glass case. They spoke in Czech, too rapid for Poirot to follow, but the word Surzheart recurred. The bell tolled 10 sending vibrations through bone. In the chaos, Poirot lunged, snatching the case and racing down the opposite stair. The pursuers shouted alarms echoing through stone corridors. He burst into the square, scattering tourists. Trams screeched. Poirot ducked into an alley, heart pounding. The case was heavier than expected, the fragment pulsing faintly beneath wax as if alive. He smashed the glass against a wall, peeling the seal. The parchment unfurled, revealing not text, but a miniature portrait of a woman with eyes like molten gold. On the reverse, fresh ink spelled an address in the Jewish quarter and a time midnight. The quarter was a warren of crooked lane synagogues and gravestones leaning like tired sentinels. At the address, a heavy door bore the iron triangle carved deep. It opened before Poirot knocked. Inside candlelight revealed a chamber lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of the room. Elise Moreau stood at the centre, no longer robed in crimson, but in mourning black, her hair unbound. "You are persistent, monsieur," she said, voice soft as velvet. "The heart chose you, though you do not yet understand." She took the portrait fragment and placed it into a silver locket around her neck. The mirrors rippled images shifting to show Poirot in various deaths, hanging, drowning, burning. Illusion or prophecy he could not tell. Elise continued. "The manuscript is not knowledge, but memory. Each fragment holds a life stolen from time. Collect them all and rewrite fate, but the cost is the collector's own years. The old clockmaker was my father. He paid to protect me." Poirot studied her grief, genuine yet dangerous. "Why lure me across Europe?" Elise smiled sadly. "Because only one untouched by the veil can break it. You, Poirot, carry no stolen time. Your mind is a blade unclouded. Help me destroy the rest, or I must kill you to keep the cycle." She produced a vial identical to those used before. One drop ends the chase. A mirror shattered behind her. Hastings burst through, brandishing a revolver, his face flushed from pursuit. "Drop it," he barked. Poirot had wired him days ago, suspecting need. Elise sighed and set the vial on a table. Guards hidden in the mirrors stepped forward, 4 men with clockwork precision. Chaos erupted. Hastings fired warning shots. Poirot grabbed the locket chain, yanking it free. Mirrors exploded in sequence glass, raining like ice. They fled through a side passage, emerging in the old Jewish cemetery. Headstones tilted in moonlight, Hebrew letters glowing faintly. Elise pursued barefoot and furious. She whispered words in a tongue that hurt to hear, and the ground trembled. Graves cracked open, skeletal hands reaching. Hastings paled but kept running. Poirot clutched the locket. Feeling warmth spread up his arm. Visions flashing lives not his own. A child laughing, a soldier falling, a queen weeping. At the cemetery edge, a wrought iron gate led to the street. Poirot slammed it shut, locking Elise inside. She pressed against the bar's eyes, pleading. "Destroy it and the dead stay dead. Keep it and become their jailer." Dawn crept over rooftops, painting stone rose and gold. Hastings hailed a carriage. As they sped away, Poirot opened the locket. The portrait was blank. The fragment dissolved into ash. Back at the pension, Poirot burned the ashes in an ashtray. Yet sleep brought dreams of ticking louder than bombs. He woke to find his watch running backward, hands spinning in reverse. On the bedside table lay a new brass key larger than the last, etched with a different symbol, a broken circle. A note in Elise's hand read, "Vienna waits where music hides screams." The chase twisted onward through cities of secrets, each fragment a step closer to the heart of the manuscript and farther from sanity. Chapter 4 beckons beneath Viennese chandeliers where melodies mask murder. Chapter 4 The Waltz of the Bleeding. Violin Vienna greeted Poirot with snowflakes that melted on his lashes and the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from street corners. He arrived at the Westbahnhof under a sky the colour of tarnished silver, the new brass key cold against his palm. The note from Elise had specified the opera house at the masked ball on All Saints' Eve. Hastings stayed behind in Prague to watch the cemetery gate, claiming someone had to guard the rear. Poirot travelled alone, the locket ash still bitter on his tongue. He took a room in a quiet Gasthaus near the Ringstrasse, where chandeliers dripped crystal and concierges spoke in whispers. That evening, he donned evening dress and a black domino mask, the key hidden in a waistcoat pocket. The Staatsoper rose like a wedding cake of marble and gold, its steps crowded with masked revellers. Inside the grand foyer, mirrors multiplied the swirl of silk and feathers, while a string quartet played Strauss until the air itself seemed to dance. Poirot moved through the crush, eyes scanning for the broken circle symbol. A liveried usher pressed a sealed card into his gloved hand. Third tier box 7, come alone or the violin bleeds. He climbed the sweeping staircase, velvet muffling his steps. Box 7 curtains were drawn tight. Inside, a single candle guttered on a table beside an open violin case lined in crimson velvet. No instrument rested there, only a pool of fresh blood still warm and spreading. The door clicked shut behind him. A woman in a gown of midnight lace stepped from the shadows, her mask a porcelain swan. "You kept the appointment," she said, voice familiar. "Elise." The swan mask lifted, revealing eyes ringed with exhaustion. She held a Stradivarius, its wood dark as dried blood. "This is the next fragment," she murmured, pressing the violin to her chin. "The strings are catgut from a hanged man, the varnish mixed with his tears. Play it, and the dead waltz." She drew the bow across the strings. A single note hung in the air, then fractured into a melody that clawed at memory. Poirot saw his mother humming in a Belgian kitchen, a childhood friend lost to war, a woman he once loved dancing in moonlight. Each vision tore open like old wounds. He staggered, gripping the table. "Stop," he commanded. Elise lowered the bow, tears cutting channels through powder on her cheeks. "I cannot. The music chooses the player." Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Masked guards in white tie burst in, wielding canes tipped with steel. Elise spun the violin case, snapping shut on the blood. She hurled a smoke pellet, crimson haze blooming. Poirot coughed, blinded as bodies collided. A cane whistled past his ear. He seized a velvet chair, swinging it into shins. Bone cracked. Someone screamed. Through the haze he saw Elise vanish through a service door, violin tucked beneath her arm. He followed into narrow backstage passages, ropes, and painted flats looming like ghosts. The orchestra below launched into the blue Danube, thousands of feet stamping in perfect time. The vibration travelled up the walls. Poirot descended an iron ladder into the flyloft high above the stage. Below, dancers whirled in a kaleidoscope of colour. Elise stood on a catwalk opposite the violin, now glowing faintly. She raised it again and played. The chandeliers trembled. Crystal drops fell like hail, shattering on marble far below. Screams rose with the music. Dancers froze mid-turn, their shadows stretching unnaturally long across the parquet. Poirot edged along the catwalk boards, creaking. Wind from the stage vents whipped his coat. Elise turned eyes wild. "Join them or end it," she shouted over the howling strings. A guard climbed after Poirot, boots clanging on metal. Poirot unhooked a sandbag counterweight and let it drop. The rope burned his palms, but the guard was swept away, crashing into scenery. Splinters exploded. Elise faltered, the melody breaking. Poirot lunged across the gap, grasping her wrist. The violin slipped. For a heartbeat, it hung in air, then plummeted strings, singing a final descending glissando. It struck the stage, bursting into flame that licked upward, blue and unnatural. The fire spread with impossible speed, consuming the curtain, the proscenium arch. Audience fled in a tide of silk and terror. Sprinklers burst, but the flames danced through water. Elise stared down, transfixed. "My father's soul was in the wood," she whispered. "Now it burns with the rest." Poirot dragged her toward the ladder. Heat blistered paint. They descended into chaos, stagehands shouting in German hoses, snaking across floors slick with melted wax. Outside, snow had turned to sleet, stinging exposed skin. Fire brigades clanged through streets, hoses arcing silver. Poirot and Elise watched from an alley, the opera house glowing like a furnace. She pulled a charred splinter from her sleeve, the last remnant of the violin. "Venice," she said, voice hollow. "The final fragment lies with the glassblowers of Murano, where fire and water meet. Then it ends." Sirens wailed. Police cordoned the area. Poirot guided Elise into a fiacre, the horse slipping on cobblestones. As they rattled toward the Danube, he examined the splinter. Etched along its length in microscopic script were coordinates and a date 3 nights hence. Elise leaned against him, shivering. "The manuscript is almost complete," she murmured. "When the last piece joins the others, time folds. Past, present, future bleed. We become the ink." At the Südbahnhof they boarded the night sleeper south. Snow gave way to frost-laced vineyards, then the lagoons of the Adriatic. Poirot locked the compartment door and drew curtains. Sleep eluded him. The splinter pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He dreamed of Venice sinking street by street water, rising through palazzo floors until masks floated like lilies on black. Canals. Dawn found them crossing the causeway. The city rising from mist domes and campaniles sharp as blades. Elise stared out the window reflection superimposed on the lagoon. "I was born here," she said, "in a palace now drowned. The guardians kept the fragment in a furnace that never cools. To claim it, you must walk through fire barefoot." The trail narrowed to a single island of flame and fragile glass, where the manuscript's heart waited to consume or crown its final seeker. Chapter 5 kindles in the furnaces of Murano. Chapter 5. The furnace that remembers Murano smelled of salt and scorched sand. Poirot and Elise crossed the narrow bridge, at dusk the lagoon lapping black beneath their feet. Workshops glowed along the fondamente, each furnace a red eye staring from brick. Glassblowers in rolled sleeves coaxed molten tears into swans and chandeliers, the air shimmering with heat. Elise led him past shuttered boutiques to a gate of twisted iron, bearing the broken circle burned deep. It swung inward without a touch. Inside the courtyard stood a single furnace older than the island itself, its mouth yawning like a dragon. No workers remained, only ash drifting across flagstones. A chain hung from the rafters holding a cage of wrought glass no larger than a birdhouse. Within lay the final fragment rolled tight and sealed with black wax. The furnace roared, though no fuel fed it, flames white and soundless. Elise stepped forward, soles smoking on stone. "The glass must be taken by hand," she said. "Fire remembers every soul that shaped it. Touch the cage and it judges." She reached, but Poirot caught her wrist. "You first tried to kill me in London. Why trust you now?" Her eyes reflected the blaze. "Because only one of us leaves this island alive. The manuscript demands balance, one life for the whole." Heat rolled in waves. Poirot removed his coat, folding it neatly on a bench. He rolled sleeves above the elbow, revealing pale skin unmarked by sun. The cage swayed chains singing. He grasped the bars. Glass seared flesh instantly, the stench of burning hair rising. Pain lanced up his arms, but he held fast, twisting until the latch snapped. The fragment dropped into his palm wax, melting skin, blistering. He did not scream. Elise watched unblinking. "You are the vessel," she whispered. "The furnace accepts." The flames shrank to embers. Silence fell, broken only by water-slapping pilings. Poirot unrolled the parchment with shaking fingers. Ink crawled across vellum, forming words in a language that hurt to read. Images bled through a child born with clockwork heart. A city unmade by mirrors. A man aging backward until he vanished into his own shadow. At the bottom, a single line in French. "Assemble beneath the lion's wing when the moon drowns." Elise took the fragment, her touch cool against his burns. "Venice," she said. "San Marco at the new moon." The piazza floods then. Water and fire meet. She pressed a kiss to his seared palm. Tears hissing on open wounds. "I will meet you there to finish what my fathers began." They left the furnace side by side, shadows, long across the courtyard. Behind them, the furnace reignited, roaring higher than before. Glass in the cage melted into a single drop that hung suspended, glowing like a star. Poirot did not look back. Night swallowed the lagoon. Gondolas rocked empty at their moorings. In a dim apothecary near the Rialto, an old woman bound Poirot's hands in aloe and linen, muttering prayers in dialect. Sleep came in snatches, haunted by the smell of his own cooking flesh. At dawn he boarded a vaporetto to the city heart, the fragment hidden in a false heel. Venice prepared for Acqua Alta. Workers stacked planks along walkways, sandbags at doorways. Tourists laughed, unaware the tide carried more than water. Poirot wandered palazzi, turned museums, their walls weeping salt. In the Biblioteca Marziana, he found a folio of forbidden maps, one showing San Marco Square as it appeared in 1348 when plague ships burned offshore. A marginal note in Latin read, "Here the veil is thinnest. Here the dead dance." 3 nights remained until the new moon. Elise vanished into the maze of Calais, leaving no trace. Poirot took a room above a mask shop where harlequin faces grinned from beams. Each evening he walked to the piazza, watching the lion atop its column wings spread against bruised skies. Water rose daily, lapping the basilica steps. Pigeons drank from puddles that reflected stars upside down. On the final afternoon, a boy in a patched coat delivered a package wrapped in oilskin. Inside lay a domino mask of polished obsidian and a ticket to the midnight flood. No words. Poirot donned the mask, its weight pressing cold against bone. At 11 he descended to the square. Moonless dark, pressed close torches hissing in iron braziers. The pavement already gleamed ankle deep. Figures emerged from arches cloaked in black oilskin faces hidden by identical obsidian masks. 12 in all, forming a circle around the sunken campanile base. Water swirled knee-high, carrying petals and candle stubs. Elise stood at the center, barefoot gown floating like ink. In her hands the complete manuscript, bound now in human skin, pale and veined. She opened it. Pages turned themselves, though no wind stirred. Words rose from vellum, glowing gold, then red. The lion above roared through stone, cannot speak. Water boiled, steam lifted in shapes of the drowned. Poirot stepped into the circle, the manuscript pulling him like gravity. Elise met his eyes across the flood. Now she said, "Choose." The choice crystallized in the steam. Destroy the book and end the cycle, or claim it and rule time itself. Poirot felt the weight of every life the manuscript had stolen pressing against his ribs. His burned hands throbbed in rhythm with the tide. Around them, the cloaked figures began to sink water, rising to waists, chests, chins. Their masks slipped, revealing faces, centuries, dead eyes, milky yet pleading. Elise extended the book. "Take it and become the final guardian. Refuse and we all drown with the city." Venice groaned, foundations shifting. Cracks spidered across the piazza. Poirot reached not for the manuscript, but for Elise, pulling her close. Together they tore the binding. Pages scattered like gulls lifted by boiling wind. Each sheet burst into flame, then ash, then memory dissolving into the flood. The water fell as suddenly as it rose, draining through grates with a sound like sighing. The cloaked figures crumbled to dust, swept away by the receding tide. The lion statue cracked down the middle wings, folding inward. Dawn bled pale across the square, empty, save for Poirot and Elise kneeling amid sodden ash. She looked at him, hands raw and bleeding. "It is done," she said, voice small. "The veil is mended. Time flows forward again." Poirot helped her stand, legs trembling. Around them, Venice stirred. Shopkeepers opening shutters, tourists arriving with cameras, none aware the city had nearly slipped into yesterday. They walked to the edge of the lagoon where the first fishing. Boats returned laden with silver. Elise boarded one without looking back, the helmsman an old man with her same eyes. The boat cut through mist toward open water. Poirot watched until it became a speck, then nothing. His hands healed slowly, scars pale as moonlight. He kept one fragment of ash in a glass vial on his desk, a reminder that some knowledge is not meant to be kept. Years later, when Hastings asked about the empty space on the shelf, Poirot only smiled and adjusted his moustache. Some stories, mon ami, end where water meets fire and memory forgets its own name. Yet far beneath San Marco, in a chamber, no map records a single page survived, pressed between stones by the weight of centuries. Ink still wet, waiting. The story pauses here, but the tide always returns. Chapter 6. The Page. Beneath the basilica years passed like pages turned by an unseen hand. Poirot returned to London. His apartment unchanged, save for the faint scar across both palms that ached before rain. He solved cases of embezzlement and jealousy, drank cocoa at precisely 4, and never spoke of Venice. The vial of ash sat sealed on his mantle, its contents grey and still, until the letter came. It arrived on All Souls' Day, envelope heavy as gilt, postmarked Venezia. Inside, a single sheet of vellum, edges singed, ink black as squid. The handwriting was his own, though he had no memory of writing it. The message read, "The tide took the ashes, but not the root. San Marco cellar. Midnight. Come alone, or the city drowns again." At the bottom, pressed into wax, the iron triangle reborn. Poirot burned the letter in his sink, but the words stayed branded behind his eyes. He booked passage on the Orient Express south, telling Hastings only that he needed alpine air. The train rocked through snow-dusted valleys, wheels singing on steel. At each stop, Poirot checked the platform for familiar faces. Elise, the clockmaker, the violinist. None appeared. Only his reflection in the window, older, eyes ringed with sleepless violet. Venice in November was a city of ghosts and fog. Canals lay flat as mirrors, gondolas moored beneath tarpaulins. Poirot walked the Riva degli Schiavoni at twilight, coat collar high, the vial of ash in his pocket now cracked, a hairline fracture letting grey dust sift between his fingers. He reached the piazzetta as the street lamps flickered on, their glow trembling in puddles left by the morning's high water. The basilica doors were locked, iron gates chained. Poirot circled to the north transept, where a grate no wider than a prayer book lay half submerged. He pried it with his cane. Hinges screamed like gulls. Below, stone steps spiraled into darkness, water dripping in slow metronome. He descended, shoes squelching, until the passage opened into a crypt older than the current church, built atop the bones of a pagan temple. Brick arches dripped with salt stalactites. In the centre stood a cistern, its surface black and unbroken. Floating upon it, the page, intact, unburned. The ink moved, forming new lines as he watched. Poirot knelt, rolling up a sleeve. The water was warm, almost alive. He reached, fingers closed on vellum slick as fish skin. A voice echoed from the shadows, soft, familiar, impossible. "You came back." Elise stepped into the torchlight he carried, barefoot, hair wet and clinging, gown the colour of drowned pearls. In her hand she held the obsidian mask from the flood, cracked down the middle. "I never left," she said. "The page needs a keeper. The city needs a sacrifice. Every century one must feed the cistern, or the lagoon rises to claim everything." Poirot studied the page. The text had rearranged itself into a contract. One soul for the city's breath. His name already written in the margin, ink still wet. He looked at Elise. "You wrote intended to die that night in the square." She nodded. "But you tore the book instead." Balance was broken. Venice has been sinking faster since. "Look." She pointed to the walls. Watermarks climbed higher than a man's head, fresh and glistening. Footsteps above, slow and deliberate. A priest in scarlet vestments descended, face hidden beneath a hood embroidered with the lion of St. Mark. He carried a silver chalice brimming with dark liquid. "The time has come," he intoned. "The detective or the guardian, one drink ends the debt." He offered the cup first to Poirot, then to Elise. Poirot sniffed, hemlock, thick and sweet. He set the page on the cistern's edge. "Tell me the truth. Who keeps the city alive?" The priest lowered his hood, revealing the face of the Murano glassblower, eyes now molten gold. "We all do," he said. "Every fragment you destroyed took a year from Venice. The page is the heart. Cut it out and the city dies with it. Bind it, and one of you lives forever as its jailer beneath the stones." Elise took the chalice, fingers steady. "I have carried this longer than you know. Let me finish it." Poirot caught her wrist. "No." He drew a small penknife, the one he used to trim cigars, and sliced his scarred palm. Blood welled. dark and quick. He pressed the wound to the page. Ink drank the offering, spreading like roots. The contract rewrote itself. Paid in full. Balance restored. The cistern bubbled. Water receded, revealing a drain spiraling into darkness. The page folded itself into a paper boat and sailed the current, vanishing with a soft sigh. The priest, the glassblower, whoever he was, bowed once and dissolved into brick dust that drifted upward like incense. Elise swayed, suddenly frail. "The weight is gone," she whispered. "I feel the years I stole returning." Poirot caught her as she fell. Her skin cooled rapidly, hair whitening strand by strand. She aged a decade in a breath, then another. By the time he carried her up the steps into moonlight, she was ancient, eyes filmed but peaceful. At the basilica door she touched his cheek. "Thank you for letting me grow old." Then she crumbled, not to dust, but to water, soaking into the stones until only the obsidian mask remained, empty. Dawn broke over the piazza. The vial in Poirot's pocket was whole again, filled with clear lagoon water that reflected the sky. He walked to the edge of the Grand Canal and poured it out. Ripples spread, carrying away the last trace of ash. Somewhere beneath his feet, the cistern lay dry and silent, the page finally at rest. Poirot boarded the train north. In his compartment, he opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote a single line. "Some mysteries are solved by letting the city keep its secrets." He closed the book, leaned back, and watched the lagoon shrink to a silver ribbon behind him. The manuscript was gone, the veil mended, the debt paid. Yet every year on All Souls' Day, the waters of Venice rise just high enough to kiss the basilica steps, then retreat, as if the city itself exhales in relief. And in London, Hercule Poirot trims his moustache, drinks his cocoa, and never opens the drawer where the cracked obsidian mask waits, patient as tide. Chapter 7. The Echo in the Ice. The telegram reached Poirot in the dead of winter 1939. 3 words typed on yellow paper. "Svalbard. Come, now." No signature, only the iron triangle embossed in red wax. He recognized the seal from the crypt, though the wax had hardened to blood. Outside his window, London lay under blackout curtains, snow muffling the wail of air raid sirens. Hastings burst in coat-dusted white, clutching a second wire from the Foreign Office. Urgent evacuation of Norwegian coal miners after unexplained deaths. Poirot packed wool and silence. They sailed from Dundee on a rust-streaked freighter converted to troop transport, the hold reeking of whale oil and fear. Northward the sea turned iron, the sky a lid of pewter. Icebergs carved with cracks like rifle shots. On the 5th night, the northern lights unfurled green and violet curtains that revealed shapes within. Faces Poirot had buried in Venice, the clockmaker, the violinist Elise, aged to water. Hastings crossed himself. Poirot only tightened his scarf. Long Yearbian huddled against permafrost wooden houses on stilts above reindeer bones. The governor, a gaunt Norwegian with frost in his beard, met them at the pier. 6 miners dead, he said, voices low. Frozen solid mid-scream lungs full of meltwater, though the shaft was 30 below. They spoke of a page in the ice older than the mine. The last man to touch it vanished, leaving only his shadow burned onto the coal wall. Poirot and Hastings descended in a cage that rattled like teeth. Headlamps carved tunnels through blue ice glittering with coal dust. The air tasted of metal and endings. At the lowest level, the crew had cordoned a chamber with pickaxes. Inside, the temperature rose impossibly warm steam curling from walls. In the center stood a slab of clear ice taller than a man. Trapped within, the page suspended in a bubble, arms outstretched as if swimming. Ink swirled across it, forming runes that hurt to follow. A miner stepped forward, gloved hand raised to chip the ice. Poirot barked a warning, but too late. The pick struck, a sound like cathedral bells underwater. The ice split. Water gushed ankle-deep, then knee-deep, carrying the page on its crest. The miner aged in heartbeats, skin-wrinkling hair greying until he collapsed a husk. The page floated to Poirot's boots, dry, untouched by flood. He lifted it with bare fingers. Coal burned worse than Murano fire. The text was a map this time, coordinates carved in glacier Latin leading to a crevasse marked Mors Janua Vitae. Death, the door of life. Behind him, the shadow on the wall detached itself, stretching tall and thin. It wore the obsidian mask cracked down the middle. The mouth opened. Though no sound came, only the smell of lagoon water in summer. Hastings fired his service revolver. Bullets passed through, shadow striking sparks from coal. The figure glided forward, leaving wet footprints that froze instantly. Poirot rolled the page tight and thrust it into his inner pocket. "Run," he ordered. They fled upward cage cables, groaning under sudden weight. The shadow followed, climbing the shaft walls like smoke up a chimney. On the surface, dawn never came, only a bruised half-light. The town lay deserted, doors ajar, sled dogs howling at nothing. Snowmobiles stood idle, fuel tanks drained to ice. Poirot and Hastings reached the governor's office, a radio crackling with static. A voice in Norwegian repeated a single phrase before cutting out. "The door opens both ways." Outside, the shadow pooled across the snow, reshaping into Elise, not young, not old, but timeless eyes clear as meltwater. "You paid with blood in Venice," she said, voice carried on wind. "Here the price's breath. The page wants lungs that still believe in tomorrow." She pointed north to the glacier tongue that overhung the fjord. "The crevasse is there. Walk in, and the world forgets war, forgets you." Hastings leveled his gun. "Stay back, witch." Poirot lowered the barrel. "She is not threatening, mon ami. She is warning." He studied the horizon where the ice met sky in a seamless white. "How many have you led to the door?" Elise smiled sadly. "Enough to keep the page from choosing on its own. It grows hungry between feedings." A rumble shook the ground. The glacier carved a slab the size of a cathedral, crashing into the fjord. Spray froze mid-air into needles that chimed against wood. In the fracture, the crevasse yawned black and bottomless, exhaling warm breath that smelled of lilies and gunpowder. The page in Poirot's pocket fluttered, though no wind touched it. He walked alone, leaving Hastings with the governor, and a single order. "If I do not return by sunset, burn the town and salt the earth." Snowshoes carried him across the crust. The crevasse edges glowed faint blue. He unrolled the page one last time. The ink had rearranged into a mirror reflecting his face at every age. Child Detective Corps. At the bottom, a new line. "Enter willingly, and the door closes behind you forever." Poirot stepped over the edge. He fell slowly as if through water. Walls of ice slid past, etched with every manuscript fragment. He had destroyed their ashes, embedded like stars. Voices whispered in languages dead before Babel. At the bottom lay a chamber round and warm lit by no source. In the center, a stone table. Upon it, the complete manuscript bound now in glacier ice, transparent and alive. Pages turned themselves, revealing futures. London in flames, children with gas mask faces, a world unmade by what men would do with eternal memory. Elise waited beside the table, no longer solid, but a silhouette cut from northern lights. "You can still leave," she said. "The door stays open until the page is read aloud. Speak the words and time rewinds to the first guardian. No cults, no curses, no war. Only the cost. Every soul who ever died because of the manuscript returns to life, and you take their place in the ice." Poirot traced the scars on his palms. "And if I refuse?" The chamber trembled. Ice cracked overhead. Then the page chooses another. The crevasse collapses. Svalbard sinks. The hunger spreads south until no mind is safe from stolen yesterdays. He lifted the book. Its weight was the weight of every choice he had ever made. Outside the crevasse, he heard Hastings shouting his name, voice thinning across distance. Poirot opened to the final page. The words were simple. "I release what was never mine to keep." He spoke them. The manuscript shattered into snow that melted before it touched the floor. Light poured from the cracks in the ice, racing upward. The crevasse sealed with a sound like a glacier giving birth. Poirot felt himself lifted, carried on a wind that smelled of spring in Belgium. He landed on the surface beside Hastings, who stared speechless at the seamless snowfield where the crack had been. The page was gone, the shadow gone, Elise gone. Only the northern lights remained, dancing slower now, as if tired. On the horizon, the sun rose for the first time in weeks, pale and small but undeniable. They sailed south on the same freighter, now carrying coal and hope. In London, spring arrived, early crocuses pushing through soot. Poirot placed the cracked obsidian mask in a drawer and locked it. Some nights, he woke to the sound of dripping water, though no pipe had burst. He would go to the window and watch the Thames flow black and steady, carrying secrets to the sea. The manuscript was ended. The door closed, yet deep beneath the Arctic, a single drop of water hangs suspended in ice, holding the shape of a page waiting for the next thaw that may never come. Chapter 8. The Train That Never Stops. The invitation arrived on a ticket stub, 3rd class, dated tomorrow, departing from a platform that did not exist. The paper was thin as onion skin, printed in faded sepia. Venice Simplon Orient Express, carriage 13, berth 13, destination unknown. No return. At the bottom, the eye in triangle had been stamped so hard the ink bled through to the other side. Poirot held it to the light. The watermark was a lion with wings folded, the same beast that had cracked in San Marco. He had not boarded a train since Svalbard, yet the ticket felt warm, as if freshly torn from a machine. Hastings found him in the study at dawn, valise already packed. "You're not seriously going," Hastings said. Poirot only tapped the ticket. "It is not a question of going, mon ami. It is a question of being late." Platform 13 appeared at King's Cross exactly at noon, materializing between the buffers of 12 and 14 like a mirage. A single carriage waited. Midnight blue, windows smoked glass. No engine, no passengers, only a conductor in a uniform 2 decades out of date. Face powdered white, eyes stitched shut with black thread. He took the ticket without a word and motioned Poirot aboard. Inside, the corridor smelled of cedar and ozone. Gas lamps flickered, though electricity had replaced them years ago. Berth 13 was the last. The door opened onto a compartment that should not fit. It stretched the length of a football pitch, lined with velvet benches facing a single object. A railway timetable bound in glacier ice. The pages turned themselves, listing every journey Poirot had ever taken, every city where the manuscript had bled. At the bottom, a new entry glowed. Departure. Now. Arrival. When the last lie is told. The train lurched. No sound of wheels on track. Only the soft hush of snow against glass. Outside, London dissolved into white. Poirot sat. The conductor entered, now carrying a silver tray. Upon it, a cup of cocoa, steam curling into the shape of Elise's face, and a single page, crisp and new. The ink was still wet. It read, "The manuscript was never the book. It was the story we told to keep it alive. Burn this and the train stops. Keep it and ride forever." Poirot lifted the cup. The cocoa tasted of childhood winters in Belgium, of his mother's kitchen, of the first case that taught him order and method. He set it down untouched. From his pocket, he drew a box of matches, the same he had used to burn the London fragment years before. The page curled in his fingers, eager. He struck the match, flame met paper. The compartment filled with smoke that smelled of lagoon water and pine. The timetable iced over, pages cracking like lake ice in spring. The train screamed, not metal but human, every voice the manuscript had stolen. The walls peeled back, revealing stars rushing past, closer than they had any right to be. Poirot stood in the doorway as the corridor shortened, benches folding into the floor, the conductor dissolving into ash that spelled thank you before the wind took it. The train stopped. He stepped onto a platform of packed snow under a sky the colour of absinthe. No station, no tracks, only a signpost pointing 2 ways, to the story that ends, and to the story that begins again. Between them stood a child, no older than 10, wearing Poirot's own face at that age, moustache just a shadow above the lip. The boy held out a fresh ticket. "You're early," he said in Poirot's adult voice. "The next departure is in 60 years, or 60 seconds. Time's flexible here." Poirot took the ticket. It was blank. "And if I refuse to board?" The boy smiled, teeth too sharp. "Then the train keeps running without you, and every passenger is someone you failed to save. Their stories loop until you join them." He pointed behind Poirot. The carriage had become transparent. Inside, shadows of the dead miners, the violinist, the clockmaker, Elise, all waved from windows that reflected futures unchosen. Poirot tore the blank ticket in half. The halves became snowflakes that melted before they touched the ground. The platform cracked. The signpost toppled. The child aged in fast forward, hair greying, skin wrinkling, until only a skeleton in a child's coat remained. Then dust. The train folded into itself like paper crushed in a fist and vanished. Silence. Poirot found himself back in his London study, cocoa cooling on the desk, the match still burning between his fingers. The clock on the mantel read 12:01. He had been gone less than a minute. On the blotter lay a single ash shaped like a tiny train. He swept it into the vial that had once held lagoon water, now empty again. That night he dreamed of platforms stretching to infinity, each with a train waiting, each conductor wearing a different face he had buried. He woke before boarding any of them. Years later, when war came and London burned, Poirot kept the vial on his person. During air raids he would touch it through his waistcoat, feeling the ash shift like sand in an hourglass. He never told Hastings what he had seen between stations, only that some journeys end the moment you choose not to take the first step. The Orient Express still runs, they say, on nights when the stars align wrong. Passengers board at platforms that appear only to those who have unfinished stories. The conductor's eyes are stitched shut, but he knows your name. And if you look closely at the timetable, you will see a blank line waiting for the date you finally decide to tell the truth. Poirot never looked. Some invitations are declined by living well. Chapter 9. The Library That Eats Time. The summons came not on paper, but in the silence between heartbeats. Poirot was shaving at dawn, the mirror fogged from his bath, when the reflection blinked first. His own eyes stared back, but the pupils were pinpricks of black ink, and the moustache drooped like wet wool. The glass rippled. Words formed in the steam, written by no hand. Bibliothèque Saint-Thomas-Sobe, level bring the ash. The letters dripped, then vanished. The mirror cleared. Poirot's reflection was normal again, except for a single grey hair curling at his temple that had not been there the night before. He knew the library, a squat stone fortress in northern France, built over the ruins of a medieval scriptorium where monks once copied forbidden texts by candlelight. The Foreign Office had used its vaults during the last war to store coded dispatches. Poirot had visited once in 1916 to retrieve a dossier on a double agent. He remembered the smell, vellum, candle smoke, and something sweeter, overripe pears left too long in the sun. Hastings met him at Victoria Station with 2 first-class tickets and a thermos of coffee. "You're certain this isn't another hoax?" he asked, stamping snow from his boots. Poirot tapped the vial in his waistcoat pocket. The ash inside had begun to glow faintly, a coal in a dying fire. "The manuscript is clever, mon ami. It does not repeat itself. It evolves." They crossed the channel on a destroyer under cover of fog, then took a rattling local train north. Saint-Omer greeted them with church bells and the smell of wet wool. The library stood at the edge of the old town, its facade pocked by shrapnel scars from 1918. The front doors were locked, but a side gate hung ajar, chain cut clean. Inside, the reading room was dark, tables draped in dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. A single lamp burned at the circulation desk, tended by a woman in a librarian's cardigan, hair pinned severe, eyes the color of wet slate. "You are expected," she said in perfect French. "Sub-level Omega. The lift is this way." She did not ask for identification. She did not blink. The lift was brass and mahogany, the kind installed when electricity was still a novelty. It groaned downward, past the public floors, past the staff offices, past the municipal archives, until the numbers on the dial gave way to Greek letters, or clicked into place. The doors opened onto a corridor of black marble veined with gold. No dust, no echo. The air tasted of iron and old ink. At the end stood a door bound in iron, no handle, only a keyhole shaped like the iron triangle. Poirot drew the vial. The ash inside had condensed into a single grain, hard as obsidian. He pressed it to the lock. The grain dissolved. The door swung inward on silent hinges. The library stretched beyond comprehension. Shelves rose in spirals, each level connected by ladders of polished bone. Books were bound in materials Poirot could not name. Skin that breathed, metal that sang when touched, glass that showed tomorrow's weather. The floor was a mosaic of vellum pages, edges curling like petals. In the center stood a reading table carved from a single block of glacier ice, its surface etched with the complete manuscript. Every fragment he had burned, drowned, frozen, or scattered, now reassembled in lines of living fire. A figure waited beside the table. Not Elise, not the conductor, not the child. This was Poirot himself, but wrong, taller, thinner, the moustache waxed to needlepoints, eyes solid black. The doppelganger wore a dressing gown of midnight silk, embroidered with constellations that moved. In its left hand, it held a quill made from a single raven feather. In its right, a pocket watch with no hands. "You kept the ash," the double said, voice layered, as if spoken by every version of Poirot who had ever lived. "Good. The library requires a seed." Poirot stepped forward. The mosaic pages beneath his shoes whispered in languages he almost understood. "What is this place?" "The sum of every story the manuscript tried to become. Every time you destroyed a fragment, it did not die. It migrated. Here it waits for an author to finish the sentence." The double gestured to the table. The fiery text rearranged itself into a single question. "Who writes the end?" Hastings, who had followed silently, raised his revolver. "Step away from him, whatever you are." The double smiled with Poirot's own mouth. "Shoot, and the bullet will age 1,000 years before it leaves the barrel. Time is negotiable here." Poirot placed a hand on Hastings' arm. "Observe, mon ami." The shelves, he pointed. On the nearest, a book bound in Belgian lace bore his mother's maiden name. Another, in red morocco, was titled "The Case That Never Happened." A third, in glass, showed Hastings dying in a trench in 1917, face peaceful, a letter from his wife clutched in stiff fingers. The books were breathing. The double opened the pocket watch. Inside was no mechanism, only a drop of black water. "The ash you brought is the last period. Place it on the page, and the story closes. The library seals. The world forgets the manuscript ever existed. But one condition. The author must stay, forever, to tend the shelves, to keep the stories from escaping." Poirot studied the table. The fiery text had become a contract, his name already signed in his own handwriting, dated tomorrow. "And if I refuse?" The double snapped the watch shut. The temperature plummeted. Frost feathered the shelves. Books began to scream. Thin, papery sounds like pages tearing. The mosaic floor cracked. From the fissures rose ink, thick as tar, forming hands that reached for ankles. Hastings fired. The bullet hung midair, crystallized, then fell as a ruby that shattered into dust. Poirot removed the vial. The grain of ash inside had grown, now the size of a pearl pulsing with light. He uncorked the vial and let the pearl roll onto his scarred palm. It was warm, alive. He walked to the table. The double watched, unblinking. "Tell me one thing," Poirot said. Who began the manuscript? The double's smile faltered. A monk in 1348, he copied a vision from a dying plague victim. The vision copied him. The cycle began. Poirot nodded. He placed the pearl not on the contract, but on the blank margin beside it. The ash spread, not as ink but as frost, racing across the fiery text, extinguishing it line by line. The double lunged, but too late. The frost reached the center of the page and bloomed into a perfect snowflake, intricate as a cathedral window. The contract dissolved. The table cracked down the middle, glacier ice carving into the fissure. The library convulsed. Shelves toppled like dominoes. Books burst into flocks of white moths that beat against the ceiling, seeking light that was not there. The mosaic pages lifted, swirling into a cyclone of vellum and dust. The double aged in reverse, hair darkening, height shrinking, until it was the child from the train platform, then a fetus, then nothing. The raven quill fell and shattered into ink that spelled Fin before evaporating. Poirot grabbed Hastings by the sleeve. "The lift!" They ran. The corridor behind them collapsed into silence, marble folding like paper. The lift doors stood open, the O-dial now spinning wildly. They dove inside as the floor gave way. The cage shot upward, cables singing, past levels that no longer existed. The doors opened onto the reading room at street level, dust sheets stirring in a breeze from an open window. Outside, Saint-Omer was unchanged. Church bells rang the hour. A baker across the square arranged baguettes in a pyramid. The library behind them looked ordinary, almost shabby. The side gate was chained again, the cut ends bright and new. Hastings leaned against a lamppost, panting. Did we dream it? Poirot opened his hand. The scars were gone. In their place, a faint tracery of frost that melted as he watched, leaving skin smooth as a child's. The vial in his pocket was empty but warm, as if it had carried sunlight instead of ash. They took the train back to Calais. At the coast, the channel was calm, gulls wheeling over fishing boats. Poirot stood on deck and scattered the last grains of ash into the wind. They caught the light, sparkling like mica, then vanished. In London, spring arrived early. The vial on Poirot's mantle now held a single white moth, wings folded, motionless. Some nights it fluttered once, as if dreaming of shelves that no longer existed. Poirot never opened the drawer again. He solved smaller mysteries, stolen pearls, forged wills, a diplomat's missing cat, and drank his cocoa at 4. But in Saint-Omer, the library's sub-levels remained sealed. The town council voted to fill them with concrete, citing structural concerns. On quiet evenings, the baker swears he hears pages turning beneath the pavement, a soft rustle like wings. Children leave drawings on the library steps, snowflakes, ravens, a little man with a perfect moustache. The manuscript is silent. The library sleeps. And somewhere, in a place that has no name, a single blank page waits for the next seed that will never come. Chapter 10. The man who never was Poirot sat alone in his London flat on the evening of 31st December 1949. The war had ended 4 years earlier, yet the city still carried its scars. Half-ruined churches, ration books, the faint smell of cordite in the rain. His cocoa had gone cold. On the mantel the vial stood empty, the white moth long since crumbled to dust. The drawer with the obsidian mask had not been opened in a decade. He was 74, though the mirror insisted otherwise. The face that looked back was smooth, the moustache black, the eyes bright with a youth that belonged to no calendar. A knock, soft, expected. He opened the door to himself. The visitor wore the same height, the same cut of suit, the same tilt of the head. But the eyes were wrong. One grey, one gold, both ancient. In the left hand he carried a slim volume bound in plain brown paper. No title, no symbol. "You kept me waiting," the visitor said in Poirot's own voice, but layered with every tongue the manuscript had ever spoken. Poirot stepped aside. "Enter then. The circle closes." They sat opposite each other in the wing chairs that had once belonged to Hastings, who now lived in Argentina with a wife and 3 children who called him Uncle Arthur. The fire crackled though no coal had been added. The visitor placed the book on the low table between them. "Open it," he said. Poirot did. The pages were blank, yet as he turned them, words appeared in his own handwriting, line by line, recounting every moment of the chase. The yellowed page in London, the catacombs, the clock, the violin, the furnace, the crypt, the ice, the train, the library. At the final page the ink was still wet. It read, "The manuscript was never parchment, ink, or curse. It was the story I told myself to keep from looking in the mirror. I am the first guardian. I am the last. I am Hercule Poirot, and I have never existed." Poirot closed the book. "Explain." The visitor leaned forward. In 1894, a Belgian boy of 19, clever but poor, vanished from a seminary in Liège. No body, no note. The police searched for a week and gave up. That boy was you, or rather the seed. A monk fleeing the Black Death carried a vision across centuries. A perfect detective who would solve the unsolvable crime, his own murder. The vision needed a vessel. You were chosen because you had no past to contradict the fiction. Every fragment you destroyed was a memory you refused. London, Paris, Prague, Vienna, Murano, Venice, Svalbard, the train, the library. Each city, a chapter you wrote to postpone the ending. The ash, the moth, the scars, props, Elise, the clockmaker, the conductor, reflections. You created them all to keep the story moving, because the moment it stopped, you would have to admit the truth. Poirot's hands were steady. "And the truth? You died in 1894, stabbed in an alley behind the seminary by a thief who wanted your watch. The monk's vision latched onto the last spark of your mind and built a life around it. 74 years of cases, friends, cocoa, mustache wax, all borrowed time. The manuscript was the contract keeping you animate. Burn a page, erase a decade. Gather the fragments, postpone judgment. But time is a debt and the creditor is patient." The visitor opened the book again. The blank pages now showed a single photograph. The seminary courtyard, 1894. A young man in a threadbare coat lay on cobblestones, blood pooling beneath his head. The face was Poirot's, frozen at 19. "I am the creditor," the visitor said. "I am also you, the part that remembers dying. The story ends tonight. Sign the margin and the fiction dissolves. The world forgets Hercule Poirot. Hastings keeps his family. London rebuilds without your shadow. The manuscript, never written, never cursed." Poirot took the quill offered, the same raven feather from the library, now whole. He dipped it in ink that appeared from nowhere. "And if I refuse?" The visitor smiled, and for the first time the expression was gentle. Then the story begins again. A yellowed page flutters from a book in 1935. A detective steps into the fog. The circle widens, but it always returns here. You have refused 9 times before. This is the 10th telling. Poirot looked around the flat. The green shaded lamp, the neat row of solved case files, the empty cocoa cup. He thought of Hastings laughing over roast beef, of Jap grumbling at Scotland Yard, of the countless lives he had ordered with his little grey cells. None of it real, yet all of it true. He signed. The ink sank into the page like water into sand. The book closed itself. The visitor stood, younger now, 19, the wound in his side already fading. "Thank you," he whispered, and stepped backward into the fire. Flames accepted him without smoke. The flat dissolved. London dissolved. The century folded like a letter returned to its envelope. In Liège, 1894, a seminary bell tolled midnight. A thief wiped a blade on a threadbare coat and ran into the night. The body on the cobblestones breathed once, twice, then stilled. Snow began to fall, covering the blood, the watch, the unfinished life. No one noticed the faint smile on the dead boy's lips, or the way the snowflakes arranged themselves into perfect order before melting. The manuscript was never found. The detective was never born. The story ends where it began. In silence, in snow, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Now, wherever you watched from, drop it in the comments. If the circle closed for you too, like and subscribe. Your support means the world. The cocoa's gone cold, but the chair is still warm. Good night.